Hi, I'm Kay Savitz. Mark Englebardt was the founder of Wayzata Technology, a company that was one of the earliest publishers of CD-ROM software. The company was founded in 1991 and produced hundreds of CD-ROM titles before going out of business in 1996. The company's disks were primarily for Macintosh, but many worked for all ISO 9660 compatible platforms. Its most popular product was the Wayzata World Factbook, a disk of information about countries and territories around the world. Downloadable versions of more than 80 Wayzata CD-ROMs are available at the Internet Archive, thanks to Mark, who sent us huge boxes of CD-ROMs and allowed us to digitize them. This interview took place on January 26, 2016. So I would like you to tell me the story of your company. First of all, how do you pronounce it? Because in my mind, I've probably been saying it wrong forever.
We pronounce it Wayzata. It's actually a town in Minnesota. It's a suburb of Minneapolis, really, and it's a. When we started the company, it was on Wayzata Boulevard, so that's how we got the name. We were actually in Minneapolis proper, I think, at that time. The very first time I touched a CD-ROM was when Apple sent me Phil and Dave's excellent CD, along with an offer for a $510 CD-ROM drive, which was less than half the going price of a CD-ROM drive at that time.
What year was this?
That's a good question. 93, 94? But
I think Phil and Dave's excellent CD, based on a quick Google, came out in 1991.
It could have been then. It was when it came out. They offered the drive at the same time, and it had the developer stuff on it that was hard to get any other way when you were dealing with modems, and some of the stuff wasn't available any other way. So there was a lot of pressure on developers to get it, and I was an Apple developer at that time. I actually specialized in making keyboards, software, or I should say firmware for keyboards to talk on the now defunct Apple desktop bus. Mm-hmm. Anyways, I bought the drive, and then I felt the desire to earn the $500 back.
Sure.
So
was this like a 1X drive?
It was. The technology was pretty tough back then. Apple actually shipped some drives in those days that sucked dust in the front door and made the drives inoperative if you were in a dusty environment. The fan was going the wrong way, essentially, and there was no filter. So I don't know if it was that first one or one of the other ones, but they had some challenges. But then I saw, I don't think I had any expectation, but I went, shortly after I got the drive, I went to the Strictly Business trade show in Minneapolis, and that would have been 91 or 92 based on the date that you found on the internet. And the show was going to be uneventful until I stumbled across a CD-ROM publisher called Quanta Press. It was, I'm trying to think. It was a little company based in St. Paul that had, I think, 4 CD titles at the time: Quick Art, the World Factbook, and a couple of other ones. And I walked up to those guys and I talked to them for a little while, and I said, "Well, gee, don't you want to sell these for the Mac too?" And they said, "Well, I guess so." And they gave me some test disc to take home and try in my Apple drive to see what I can make of it. And the the clip art actually worked right out of the box. It was an ISO 9660 disc, and it you could just use it on the Mac. It wasn't anything to do. We actually packaged that for the Mac and sold it a few months later. Mm-hmm. The World Factbook had a proprietary text search on it that intrigued me. I dug into it a little bit, and then I was actually trying to reverse engineer it. I got stuck when it wasn't encrypted, but it was compressed, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was. So I called the company. They were called Textware, and I told them what I was trying to do, and they said, "Well, why don't you come out and visit us?" And so I flew to Park City, Utah, and I came back with a non-cash agreement with them. I would make a Mac version of their software and be able to publish the World Factbook and eventually other titles. And I would give them the source code so they could do what they wanted with it as well. And so between the clip art called Quick Art and the World Factbook, we were in the CD-ROM Mac business. The Quanta people sold the PC versions, and we actually, for the first, I think, year to 2 years, we actually bundled the floppy with the Mac software along with the same disk that was on the PC side, because it was really too expensive to remaster the disk and put the Mac software on it, which was rapidly changing because I was still perfecting it anyway. So
you could use the PC CD-ROM in your Mac if you booted the Mac software off a floppy?
Right, exactly. And we made it. We made the Textware software for the Mac work fairly well, and at this point, we had moved the company to, I think the first real address we had for when we were a CD-ROM company, one of them was in Farmington in my friend's basement. And so I'm trying to remember what year it would have been. Maybe a year, 9 months to a year later, probably 92. Yeah, something, could have been 91, but in that fall, we were just putting the word out that we had these titles, and I was just sort of contacting whoever I found that was interested in CD-ROMs, and Mac Warehouse called me back from one of my contacts and said,
the mail order catalog, right?
Yeah, and they said, we found out that Macworld magazine was featuring CD-ROMs in the next cycle, which was about 2 months out, I think. Mm-hmm. And so they picked up all of our titles at that time, which I think was 4 or 5, all repurposed Quanta titles, and instead of sort of dancing with us and trying one title, and they were so hungry for this new baby CD-ROM market that they were taking everything. And so we went from sort of no revenue to, I think we were hitting $15,000 a month within a few months of that initial phone call with them.
Just based on one mail order catalog.
Yeah.
And
I think
you hadn't actually created any of your own content. You were just repurposing.
Right. And we had we had. That's exactly right. We had that little niche. No one else, or very few other people, were doing Mac discs at all at that time. So we were out in front of the market, and Macworld writing about it triggered the market. People wanted them. We were charging, I think, around $129 for the World Factbook, and I don't remember exactly, but I'm thinking $249 for the Quick Art. So it didn't take a lot of sales to make decent numbers. Later on, of course, you couldn't get near that for a CD-ROM. You're looking to get $5 or something wholesale for a title like that. But
wasn't the World Factbook based on public domain information put out by the CIA?
It was, absolutely. And if you've never seen the book, the actual World Factbook, which the unclassified version, which you can get, is really quite cool. It's a little, the one I saw was soft cover, and it's got every country, one country per page, and it's the classified version of that book is what sits on the president's desk. So if there's a flare-up in some country you've never heard of, there's some quick background information available to really. The CIA made it for other government officials, and it's a side effect that regular people can buy it. But yeah, and it's at that time. This is pre-internet, so there's no other way to get information that's electronic. You could literally copy and paste the data from the World Factbook into your report or into your whatever you were doing. Later on, we added maps, which I think there were maps in the book, but we weren't trying to use those. We ended up making our own maps at one point, and that title alone, if we were in the record business, would have been a gold record. We did, by my estimate, not counting whatever Quanta sold, we sold around 500,000 of them.
Wow.
So the early days of the CD-ROM business was very interesting because it was full throttle. Anybody who was publishing a title, almost for any reason, was making money. They weren't selling a lot, but they got a good enough price that it didn't matter. And over time, we switched to pressing titles ourselves. We focused on the Mac market, but we didn't discriminate. We did have some PC titles, and we did have many titles of our own that were cross-platform. Quite a few of them used the text-aware application to do the text search. The way CD-ROMs were, especially at 1x speed, is that if you filled a CD-ROM full of text data, you had to index it on the device, on the CD-ROM, or it would have been deathly slow. You had to pre-index the searches that the customer might need to do. So you indexed every word. Today, everybody's used to that because Google does that for the whole internet. But back then, it was a specialty market, and Textware was in Utah because the Mormons are interested in genealogy sort of ahead of everybody else. And so they digitized text records of the history of their people. And so companies like Textware grew up grew out of that. I think the university out there, Brigham Young, was heavy into text indexing because of that same thing. So I think the people, at least some of the people from Textware, were former researchers at Brigham Young, and it was the same with all the other companies that were doing text indexing that were private. Is that they had some employees that used to be over at Brigham Young or were still there, or the like. So it's I imagine even if you look into Google's past, you will find some links between their search engine text indexing and the Brigham Young folks, because that's where it all came from. So from there, CD-ROM business became a little more normal, where we had our own titles. We had CD-ROM trade shows. Our favorite trade show, of course, was the Mac World trade shows. We would fly 4 or 5 staffers to Mac World every year in San Francisco, and most of the Boston shows which were going on, and we'd set up a 10 by 10 foot booth, and we'd sell on a good show we'd sell $20,000 worth of merchandise, all CD-ROMs. We had good luck selling 10 packs. You'd take the World Factbook and 9 other discs of fonts and clip art and news and whatever else you could find, and made a 10 disc pack for, I don't know, $50 or something. So it's, the prices obviously would have come way down by then, and I might have been 94 or something like that. And then we would invite pretty much anybody who contacted us with content. We would see if we could figure out a way to publish. And we met people at Macworld, and we would publish their stuff and pay them a royalty, and then get it into the market.
So did you wait for people to approach you, or did you go to them looking for content? I mean, you must have just been starving for new ideas and new content.
Once we were out there, we had quite a bit of unsolicited stuff. Plus, we did go and look, and we also kept our relationship up with Quanta Press, and we republished most of their stuff for really the whole time. Some of their stuff was corny and interesting. They actually published a CD-ROM called About Cows, and and you wouldn't expect that to sell very well, but it actually did okay. It's people had a thirst for anything that you could give them that would entertain them for a little while on their computer, because computers in those days, when you bought a computer, you were buying a blank slate. It was a word processor, a spreadsheet, some graphics programs, but no content. And so when you sat down at your computer, if you weren't writing a paper or doing a newsletter, you were kind of bored, So one of the products that was very strong in the CD-ROM business, as you might expect, was the encyclopedia. We didn't get an encyclopedia ourselves until, I think, 1994, and I went to the trade show in Europe called the Frankfurt Book Fair, and I went there expressly looking for an encyclopedia, And the one I found was called the Guinness Encyclopedia. These are the same people that make the beer and the Guinness Book of World Records.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a deal with them to republish the encyclopedia, which was a beautiful color, one-volume encyclopedia filled with infographics. And we got the rights to publish that on CD-ROM. By the time we got it done and out the door, the CD-ROM industry was starting to change, and starting to change pretty rapidly because the internet had come along. And let's think about this. In 94, we did $2.2 million in revenue. In 95, it had dropped off to less than half of that. And if we had made it through the whole year of 96, it would have been under 100,000. And we closed our doors in spring of 1996. Just too much overhead and not enough sales. The mind share had gone to the internet by then. As a matter of fact, some of the last CDs we sold to our own customers was the CD with the Netscape browser and dialing software to get you on the internet.
Hmm.
And
so you were killed off by the likes of AOL and Earthlink and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it was really the mind share. Once you got on the internet and you had access to, what was it, Alta Vista at the time? Google hadn't been invented yet, but you had the search engine. You had some of the university sources were available. Some of the Gopher feeds. The World Factbook was on the internet fairly early. The data we were selling, the value of the data was still there, but the mind share was gone. People didn't perceive the need anymore. Even clip art was the sales were soft because people could find images online. Mm-hmm. Now at the time they didn't even realize they were actually stealing them. They were just finding some image on some website and downloading and using it for their newsletter or whatever. But it took away the desire to stick a CD-ROM in your computer was gone once you were online. It was a fairly universal truth. And my friends at the other CD-ROM companies all were in the same pickle. There was only one company that, of the friends I had in the industry by then, who actually arranged to sell his company. I don't remember his company's name right now, but and we actually tried to sell as well and didn't have any luck getting any serious interest. The company ended up in Grand Rapids for its last 3 or 3.5 years of existence. Grand Rapids, Minnesota, that is. But it was really fun while it lasted. At our peak in the 1994 Christmas season, we had 17 full-time employees, and on any given day, we had 25 temps on the property assembling CD-ROMs from the cases, jewel cases, and the discs and the little inserts. That's how busy we were.
Wow. All those CDs were assembled by hand? I mean, the cases and everything?
Yeah, what we found was that if you had the pressing plant assemble the CDs for you, they wanted an extra 50 cents to do that. And if you had a slow-selling title, if you pressed 1,000 of them, which was a pretty common pressing, even for a slow one that you anticipated would be a fairly slow seller, that meant you invested an extra $500 in packaging and an extra some number of dollars for the jewel cases and the printing. And what we did instead was we bought the raw discs with just they obviously silk screened the label on the disc for us, but we bought the raw discs, and then we didn't assemble them until we were going to sell them. And so we did not, it was sort of a just-in-time approach. We did not stockpile finished goods. We stockpiled the raw CDs, and then as we sold them, we would package them up, and we'd keep ahead of it a little bit. But basically, if we got a big order for World Factbook from a distributor, the team would make them, shrink wrap them, and ship them. And we didn't have the need to keep the finished inventory around, which of course took more space. So that was a different approach than virtually everybody else in the industry, but it saved us a fair amount of money, because if you had a title, you pressed 1,000 of them, and you never sold more than 100 of them, then you only had to buy 100 jewel cases, and only had to spend the labor to assemble the 100.
So it sounds like the company was founded in 91 or so, and by 96 it was over.
Yeah. I will point you to a couple of things. Are you familiar with the Inc. 500?
Sure.
We made the Inc. 500, I think.
It's like the 500 fastest growing companies, right?
Yes.
Okay.
In 1994 or 95. And their website may be a little fuzzy on the history of their own awards, but I think you'll find it in there. And what was very interesting and surprising to them is they awarded that to us, I think, based on 1994 data in 1995, and I think the party, the conference, I think they call it a conference, it's really a party, was, I'm thinking it was in 96. So by the time we got to the party in California, we had already closed our doors. So we were unique at the party in having a business that was on the Inc. 500, but was already done. And I mentioned that in one of our sessions, and that got the attention of the editors and the writers. And so they covered the demise of Wayzata Technology on the inside back cover, the last page of the magazine that wasn't advertising, called an obit, and I think that would have been in November or December 1996 issue, and you can still find that story online. I think, at least I found it a couple years ago.
What were, over the course of the company, what would you say were the most popular titles?
The World Factbook by far in terms of quantity. We had some real interest in a California artist named Josepha Haveman, who published a series of CDs that were her kind of parts of her life's work, but the one that really garnered early attention was called Space, Time, and Art. and it was she took images from NASA and she photoshopped them and gave them personality and a story, and it had text and it had the images, and it was a very popular title. We sold a lot of them, and titles like that were kind of like, that was where the fun was. We did fonts and we did clip art, we did a lot of photography, but that was sort of I don't want to say turn and burn, but it was like we were just out there competing with everybody else at that level. It was, everybody had a font disc after a while. Everybody had lots of varying clip art and photography, but we were trying to do some of that more interesting stuff by more interesting people, and Josepha was one of those people. She passed away last year, but she told me, we became friends, and she told me once that we had paid off her house in the Berkeley Hills with our CD-ROM sales, with her checks. So, it was a real interesting business for quite those number of years, and then the brakes came on, and it was over. The speed at which it shut down as a viable industry was pretty incredible, faster than I could react. And I'm a pretty reactive guy. I pay attention to things, so it was a very interesting period in my life, and I learned a lot. And we made a lot of friends. We sold a lot of product. The various authors, we sent them checks, I think, every quarter. Some of the checks were pretty good size. Some were small if the CDs weren't selling as well. But I think we had 100 different authors in the life of the company, something like that.
Wow. What kind of royalty would they get? Was it like they always got 10%, or was it negotiated? Or
we started out at 50%, which was too high. Wow. I think we ended up at 25%, and we also had the understanding that they would participate in the marketing. It was very common in that industry, in our industry, to trade product for advertising space. And if I traded 25 of your disc to the advertiser and I didn't get any cash for it, then I didn't pay a royalty on that. So the effective royalty rate after you did what they called co-op advertising was, somewhat different than the number on the contract. But it wasn't a secret. They understood that when they went into the contract. It was I think pretty common in the industry to do the accounting that way, and so it was. It was a fun time. It was very, very fast-paced. We would turn around CD-ROMs, get them on the market in 10 days sometimes.
Wow.
We had when we hit the peak, and everyone else did, and I think that was the Christmas season, 1994. We had trouble getting pressings out of the plant. They were pressing Michael Jackson and Elvis, and they had CD sales. Audio CD sales were still really good at that time, and so our little 500 and 1,000 piece runs were. They didn't really want to bother with them, and you kind of had to beg them to get time on the presses to get your product out the door. And we had a pretty good relationship with a couple pressing plants, so we managed to get some product. But it was the demand between CD-ROMs and regular audio CDs overwhelmed the capacity of the industry, and we had never seen it before that. And then, of course, by the next year, nobody cared. They were back to just doing Elvis, and the CD-ROMs were kind of done. And so it's that speed that of the, not just my company. If you go look at if you got a hold of, say, the Mac Warehouse catalog from those years, from '94, you would see pages on pages and pages of CD-ROMs for sale. And if you go look up any of those companies, they all stopped business about the same time. Very few of them made it forward. I'd say 1 in 10 maybe made it a few years. The distributors are pretty much gone. The whole industry is not there. The part that still exists and is going away now is the publishing of commercial software like Photoshop and that kind of thing. And even that is, like, Apple doesn't ship any CDs with their computers anymore. If you have a computer and you lose the hard drive, you press a key on the keyboard and hook yourself up to the network, and it re-downloads the software onto your new hard drive. Mm-hmm. Sort of the happiest day of my career in CD-ROMs was the day that Apple included the drive in the computer, which I think was 93 or maybe early 94. It was the 2VX, and it was $3,000, $29.95 for this slow, underpowered computer, but it had a CD-ROM in it. And by the time they did that, we were already seeing kind of if you were a little bit clairvoyant, you could see that the end was coming, So they put them in on that day, and a few years ago they took them out. There's no. I don't think Apple sells anything with a built-in CD DVD drive anymore.
Yeah, I don't think so. Time is come and gone.
Yeah, it's the cycle is complete. I don't think they ship computers with floppies anymore. Maybe some of the PC guys still do, but Apple certainly doesn't. That is the scenario we're dealing with. Is the I don't want to say this was a fad, because this was the step. If the internet had been functional, the CD-ROM industry would have never taken off. There would have never been a need to deliver data in the mail to your home. Actually, you can see the same thing in Netflix now.
Netflix, I was just about to say, yeah.
When Netflix started, there was no feasible, convenient way to deliver a high-def video over the internet. The internet existed, but people didn't have fast enough connections, and the infrastructure to do it really wasn't there. So Netflix was shipping DVDs to people's homes, and they, you got to give them credit. They did a brilliant job of making it as cheap as possible. They get a CD weighs, I don't know if it's under an ounce, but it's right about there. So they put it in an envelope with no real padding, and so they get it out to you for maybe 50 cents in postage or something like that. And you send it back for another 50 cents in postage, and you can get, I guess, 4 or 5 a month, sort of, if you're diligent about watching them and sending them right back, and then you get this, they get about, I don't know what it was then, $10 or $15 from you, and so they've got $4 in postage and whatever they paid for the DVDs in the first place, but they had a profitable business almost from the first day because they got the postage costs down. But now it's kind of silly to get a DVD in the mail from them when you can just click a button and see the same movie. There must be a few movies that they don't have the rights to distribute digitally because you still need to use the DVDs for some of the stuff in their inventory. But it's the same thing. People, in a few years, people aren't even going to have the drives to play those movies because everything's online. In our experience, now there are still places where you're not really on the internet because you're on satellite or something, and you can't do any of that stuff. And those people are really being left behind because they don't have a lot of choices to get stuff. Netflix is still servicing them, but they can't buy the stuff on CD-ROM anymore that they used to because it's not there. So, but as long as you have the network connectivity, then the whole existence of a CD-ROM of data delivered physically to you is silly. It's gone.
Yeah.
How do you say it? It was so very different when we started. Before I did the CD-ROMs, I had a new Mac with floppy drives, and I was trying to think of something people wanted to have on their computers, and I came up with the idea of putting the King James Bible onto floppy. And it took, I think, 7 of them. And I sold, I don't know, 10 sets before it got boring and uninteresting. But back then, before most people had hard drives, it was like, how do you get them this data? And or they might have a hard drive, but they certainly aren't going to download the Bible on a modem. It would have taken 7 hours or something. So that's the story. That's the history of Wayzata.
Excellent. I think I have 2 more questions. One, we talked about your most popular software. What was like the weirdest stuff that you sold, and was there anything that you went, you know what, this is too weird, we're not going to do it?
Because of the way we did it, our costs were low enough because we didn't invest in packaging ahead of time. We didn't invest in some other stuff. I would take some pretty interesting risks and publish stuff that other people weren't interested in, and we did okay with that stuff. There was one title called The Museum of Anything Goes, and we thought it was clever, but we didn't love it or anything. I think Wired magazine labeled that one of the 10 worst CD-ROMs on the market. So we got accolades essentially for delivering what they considered junk. I didn't think it was that bad, but it wasn't as good as I guess, what people expected. It wasn't a full story. It was just some guys playing around with, I think, Director. I think it was probably built in Director. I'm not sure. Macromind Director, but the one of the most interesting titles from my point of view. I actually have two that I'll mention. We met a guy in Virginia who had assembled publicly available data called the Place Name Index, and he was selling to libraries and big corporations, and he was selling the disc for $1,500 a piece, and I convinced him to let us do the Mac version, and I got him to let us sell it for $7.95, and it was just what it sounds like. It was the names of places with their latitude and longitude. So you could, it was probably generated from map data at some point. But if you were looking for Kruger's Creek in Minnesota, it would tell you the latitude and longitude so you could find it on the map. And
all right.
As you know, pre-internet, stuff like that can be difficult. Today, Google Maps takes all that stuff away. You just Google it, and there it is. But we sold, I don't know, maybe a dozen copies of that thing, but it was pretty esoteric, but I found it interesting. It was my family, I grew up in the map business. My family still runs a map store in Minnesota, and they have had map stores of different map stores in Minnesota since I was in high school, and so anything to do with maps always has a special place in my heart. The other title that was kind of interesting, we did the Washington Times newspaper on CD-ROM with the search engine. And I think we could fit about a year on each disc, maybe two. And this is, like I mentioned, pre-internet. There was very little way for the average person to search the news. And so you could take one of those discs and you could search for Bush's, this would have been Bush Sr. You can, I think you can search for one of his favorite phrases he used during the campaign. Read my lips, no new taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And, we were very proud of the fact that we had a disc that could be used for real news research and news information at a time when regular people didn't have access. If you were a news organization, of course, you had your own database and stuff, but that wasn't out in the marketplace, and we were one of the first with the news product, and we would sell that. You could buy one issue, you could buy a subscription. We did it 4 times a year. It was a good product, but it was also the Washington Times happens to be pretty far on the conservative side of the spectrum. So depending on who you were looking at to sell it to, they might not consider it as much news as slant. And I'm not the kind of guy who I didn't care about that. It's like, to me, it was data. And if I could have gotten, the New York Times or the Washington Post, I would have loved to, but I got what I could, and we put that on the market. It was pretty successful.
Nice.
and it was fun to do because you'd have to run the indexer. So when you were building the disk, I think in the beginning it took a couple of days because you were dealing with slow computers and slow hard drives. And as the computers got faster, you could get it indexed in maybe 6 hours or something. And then the index went on the disk, and you had a searchable news archive you could put in your briefcase and bring with you.
Speaking of archiving, I want to point out that your company and others like it inadvertently created archives of things that are no longer available. A lot of stuff like shareware CD-ROMs, you throw 600 megabytes of software on a CD that you got from FTP sites or whatever, and those FTP sites are now gone. Some of that software is not really available anymore. The News Bytes CD-ROMs, which are some of my favorite of computer news, well, that got bought up by the Washington Post, I think, and that information is no longer available online. So
right.
You guys saved it there.
When I was doing this, I sort of understood that I was making an archive of things that were not normally archived for general use. And one of the I have one more little story. We were never partners, but we did a lot of common things. The Quanta Press people and myself, the owner of the company was named Mark Foster, and Mark and I flew from Minnesota to St. Louis to visit the Sporting News newspaper, and I think it's a weekly, and I think they love baseball the most, but I think they try and cover all the sports. And this was in the early days, and we sat down with them, and they had a typesetting machine that used mag tape, and so they had an electronic version of the Sporting News on these tapes, and so I'm all excited. We just have to make a deal. They send us the tapes when we're done. When they're done with them, we get a tape drive and read them off and put them on CD-ROM. And then I'm quizzing the guy who's essentially the tape manager. I can see all the tapes and I said, awesome. Where's last year? Where's the archive? And he said, oh, we recycled them. I was in tears practically. They from my point of view, to save money on tapes, they were throwing away their legacy. It wasn't their gig. They didn't get that. I got that. I heard later on that there was actually a firm in China or Taiwan that was rekeying the stories from that newspaper, and I think it was sort of an independent gig where if you wanted to have access to that, you paid them, and maybe they paid some royalty back to the Sporting News, but Sporting News didn't own it after it was keyed in. It was owned by this other sort of sweatshop that was keying in data, and that was a very, for me, it was kind of sad. It's like, and I don't even know if we could have educated them into starting to save the data. We tried, obviously, but for us, instead of us leaving there with some way to get the last 10 years of the Sporting News or something on CD-ROM, we had nothing, because nobody wants just a few issues. I do have one more quirky CD-ROM we did that was fun and sad at the same time. We did the Vietnam. We did the wall. We met the guys who carved the names into the wall for the Vietnam Memorial, and they gave us the data, and we published it on CD-ROM.
All the names that were...
All the names on the wall.
They're carved? And, nice.
Yeah, and I think that we even, put some of the profits off into the, into one of the veteran funds, but it was... We didn't do that one to make money. That was just... That needed to be preserved electronically. And it's like you said, it's at a time when they wouldn't have done it. And the way the world works is if it's on the internet now, it might not have come from my database. It might have come from somebody taking pictures and keying it back in, doing it the hard way. But it's, I thought it was pretty cool that we did that, and it wasn't to sell a lot of them. It was to preserve data, and we met some very interesting people who, they had techniques to fix spellings and regrind names that were wrong, and they said it wasn't easy.
Wow.
So,
and to bring this around to today, and apropos of archiving electronic data, now all of Wayzata's CD-ROMs are being digitized and put up on archive.org through collaboration of you, me, and Jason Scott. So let's talk briefly about that. I mean, I contacted you and said, hey, do you have these CDs? And amazingly, you did. I mean, practically everything you guys published. Can you talk about that? About why you saved them? And
I'm a little bit of a pack rat, but basically, I don't want to say it's my life's work, but it's 5 years of my life, and we've been dragging those discs around for all these years because it's the same reason. It's archival. It's data you can't find elsewhere. And some of the CDs I sent you aren't mine. They're just CDs that my friends gave me, that other people in the industry gave me. And so I sent those along to you too, in hopes that you can use them. And the Apple CDs I sent along are, I think I had even more, and I might have given them to somebody or sold them. I don't think they're all there anymore, but at one time I had every single Apple CD they ever published for their developer program. And but yeah, it's my mindset, and the part of the business that was always my thing was the text data, was the actual data that we could get our hands on and publish on CD-ROM and make available. And that was kind of one of my passions. So I couldn't bring myself to toss that stuff, even though I got pressure from the keeper of the attic to clear some space, and so it's what it's a legacy from that era of my life, but it's also a legacy from that era of the entire industry. It's like you said, some of that shareware and freeware just doesn't exist anywhere else. And if you're trying to run an old computer for some reason, you need that stuff. You can't. The modern stuff just won't run on an antique machine. So it's days gone by, but I could never bring myself to toss that data when it wasn't archived somewhere.
Well, I'm glad you saved it. The world can keep on enjoying it. I think I have what I need. Thank you so much, Mark.
Have a great day.